Okay, for our speaker this evening, I'm going to make some of this up. You know, we just did a history along with the Department of Horticulture is doing a history. Gusty Hertog is heading that up. And so I had an opportunity to read all the newsletters to write the J.C. Ralston Arboretum history. And so in one of the newsletters in 1996, Hurricane Fran didn't spare the Arboretum. Dr. Ralston estimated that 125 major trees were lost, including a 55-foot American holly. It took many volunteers and staff and students, plus a work crew from the zoo and Pine Knot Perennials Nursery to get the Arboretum cleaned up 3 weeks before an audience from around the world came to visit. The heroic students were Ms. Karen Jones, Mr. Richard Olsen, and Mr. Ian Simpkins. So that's 1996. That kind of gives you a little bit of history on Richard. Richard is currently a research geneticist with the USDA Ag Research Service in the Floriculture and Nursery Plant Research Unit at the U.S. National Arboretum. He leads the urban tree breeding program. Richard has a bachelor's degree in landscape design from NC State in 1998, a master's degree in horticulture, University of Georgia in 2001, and a doctorate in horticultural science at NC State in 2006, working with Dr. Tom Randy. So many of you are familiar with him. You know him. He's part of us.
Thank you, Ted. I was wondering what was going to come out of the woodworks for. It has been that long. I was reminded that I am 38 this year when I broke my leg sledding a month ago. More or less broke my leg, and and I know it was a month ago because we've had a snow in our garden since January 22nd. Solid snow, and we got 6 inches on Monday. And I've already had this talk canceled once. It was supposed to be at Virginia Tech because of snow. And then now, tonight, we're going to get something, maybe? Nothing?
I hope not.
It's March 6th. I'm supposed to be planting peas next weekend, so this is getting a little bit old. So, anyways, it's always a pleasure to be back. And you are guinea pigs tonight. We have to go fast. This is 190 slides. But I'll talk fast. I'll turn off the lights. And okay, this is me. Now, the general idea of this talk, China, its flora, frustrations, and future prospects is, first I need to say I am not an expert on China. There are people in this room that know a lot more about China than I do. It's more of, I was so excited that I finally got to go to China. And I think anyone who's a horticulturist here would understand why. I don't need to even talk about it. And I'll show a little bit. But working at the USDA, we have a number of frustrations with China because we have to follow some bureaucratic channels that you don't have to follow at NC State. And I thought that I was going to talk about that, but you don't want to hear about bureaucracy and red tape. So then I thought, well, let's just turn this into a typical travel log of China. And I remember, Tony David, where's Tony? Somewhere. One of the great things when I was here as a student, you may remember this, was when people would come into town, and you guys were the forerunners into China in the 90s when China was opening up, was I got to benefit when people like Dan Hinckley would come in, or you guys would come back from your trips, and we would go back to Tony's house, and you remember this, everyone would bring their carousels of slides, and they would show each other all the pictures they took, and then this is the secret that Tony does not want you to know. They would argue over what the hell they collected. And it was really teamwork, right? It's a team process in trying to figure out, because they were really moving into China for the first time really since World War II, right? China had opened up, and so these guys were really going. That's what I think of China. I think of those fabulous talks of them getting into China, strange things you ate. Although, Tony, you packed like 20 pounds of beef jerky to go to China, if I understand correctly. And then the reality is I go to China in 2013, and it's not the same. So the idea of this talk is just to show you that I went, why I went, and maybe some pictures. And so that's the general theme. And so this is just sort of an overview. But really, I went for the entire month of November, essentially. I came back just before Thanksgiving. And it was funded by the Friends of the National Arboretum. I wrote a little grant when I first got to NC State. When I first got to the USDA, about a year and a half actually afterwards, I said, wouldn't this be great? This has been troubling us. Let's go. And they said, that would be great, and here's your money. And so we got money. It took about 4 years to plan this trip. And the idea was to go to the Chinese Academy of Sciences in China and all of their major institutes of botany in Beijing, Kunming, and Nanjing. So it's covering some ground to study in their herbaria, the dried plants. I know that sounds like thrilling and exciting. And to see the gardens, and then to make contacts. Because there is a generational gap between the older folks in China, just like us and baby boomers, and then trying to make those important connections with the young scientists that sort of continue moving forward in China. And the genera that we were interested in, a little bit of maples, a little bit of boxwood, I'll tell you a little bit about that. Catalpa, which is the Indian bean trees, which is what I got my Ph.D. on, which really started this. Fringe trees, Kinanthus, Corylopsis, and Ulmus. Those are sort of the things that we were interested in. And it was just me and a colleague, Dr. Joe Kirkbride. You'll see pictures of him, and he was wonderful to go with. And this is, again, when I was here at NC State in the mid-90s, thinking about plants, this is what I came up in. I am spoiled. I am really a product of just dumb luck, being in horticulture at a time when the industry was thriving, when a lot of exciting things were happening. And I was reading books like this, which you shouldn't read as an undergraduate. It doesn't help you in your classes, I don't think, maybe in the long run. But this is the point. All this plant exploration that was done in the golden age of plant exploration, in the turn of the 20th century and a little bit afterward, the journey wasn't over. That all this plant material came into cultivation. In this case, Frank Keenan Ward, the great rhododendron hunter in England, saying, we will continue these explorations year after year as these plants come into flower. Meaning we will still be learning, we will still be understanding what we've seen in the wilds of China. And of course, you don't need to tell anyone in the southeastern United States about the importance of rhododendrons, right? 900 species of rhododendrons in Southeast Asia, okay? A good portion of them are in Yunnan province where we were headed. So, and this is what I read. It's the plug for Body. You don't have his book. Sorry, is this shameless or not? But he won't get any money, but we'll run up the price on eBay. And this is what I came into. I was really spoiled. This is Heronswood catalogs. How many still have your Heronswood catalogs? I do not let them out of my sight. Up until the last year, the Explorer Gardens, Bobby, Dan Hinckley. Wow, the allure of plant hunting, right? This is what you want to go, exotic lands. You want to collect these plants, bring them in. And how cool is that? And then this is sort of my pride and joy. E.H. Wilson. How many of you know that name?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Well, I've slowly managed to accumulate Plant Hunting, the original volumes, and The Aristocrats in the Garden, and a few others. So E.H. Wilson, Chinese Wilson, greatest plant explorer, right, in modern age. So that's what we came into. Who is E.H. Wilson? Why do we care? Why do we still go back to China? It's all done, right, Tony? No, not done. Mark, it's all done. Here's Chinese Wilson in Sichuan, 1909, right? These images come from the Arnold Arboretum. They've all been scanned. You can download these through the Harvard libraries, and it's really, the graduate students in here, I shouldn't tell you this, their advisors will hate me, but you can waste a lot of time scanning through old images. And so this is what you want, right? You want to go to China, right, and figure out that this old China still exists, right? This is independent of plans, right? This is just travel and going and seeing. I work for the USDA, and what a lot of people don't realize, some of you who've seen my talks realize that Frank Meyer was the other collector, a contemporary of E.H. Wilson, focused on agronomic crops. If you eat soybeans and tofu, that's Frank Meyer. Meyer lemon, Syringa Meyer, Syringa oblata, those type of things were introduced by Meyer. This is the Great Wall of Northern Hebei. So you want to find out, do these things still exist? Can we go see it? I would love to see. What was Frank Meyer looking at when he drove through these hills in northern Hebei with the Great Wall and Catinus cochigrea, smoke bush, regular old smoke bush. I learned smoke bush as a plant that grew in the Western Asia, Mediterranean. But it actually goes all the way across Asia to north of Beijing. Platycladus orientalis, just regular old Oriental arborvitae in the wild. So I love Meyer because Catalpa, right? He introduced Catalpa bungi into the West, really. It was introduced before, but again, so when he goes, they take all these great pictures, and these things still exist. Can you see these? And what does it mean? Why are we still going back up to 100 years? And so again, you hope one day you'll do something as spectacular as these guys. Wilson did not just collect ornamentals. There was an argument between Charles Sargent, the National Arboretum, who was the director at the time, and David Fairchild, who was the director of the plant exploration program at the USDA, and saying, basically, Fairchild would say, would it kill Wilson to collect a few soybeans every once in a while? And Sargent would say, would it kill Meyer to collect a few ornamentals every once in a while? And every once in a while, they would collect something that was, in case of Wilson, not ornamental. But of course, Acer, Griezmann, paperbark maple, right? One of the great plants from China. And this is a good example of why we still go to China. This is actually Wilson's original introduction, still growing in the Arnold Arboretum. So these things have longevity. They have a narrative. They have a story. I think when you have Botanic Gardens and Arboreta, people walk by that tree, they may not realize all that. But we have a lot of opportunities, I think, for these interesting narratives. And of course, when Southwest China was really being explored, that's when diversity really exploded. Now, how many went to Dr. Beauford's talk on Tuesday? So I don't need to say anything about diversity in China. We're done, right? This is the part of China he's focused on. That's where the greatest plant diversity really occurs. It's not really China. It's Southwest China. It's Yunnan, Sichuan, parts of Sichuan, Hubei, and of course other areas. But this is Joseph Rock, who collected and took photographs for National Geographic. And of course, it's much the same, right? This is actually me in Yunnan. So this is why we still go Abies de Labii. And this is the sort of the sex appeal of plant exploration. And what's interesting is I essentially grew up in North Carolina, in the mountains of North Carolina, where we go for the summers in the cabins. This is Hickory Nut Gorge. Anybody been there? Chimney Rock, west of Lake Laura. Lake Laura is the eastern terminus of Hickory Nut Gorge. And to see sort of the similarity. So when I was growing up in horticulture and biology, seeing the relationships between our flora, what I remember hiking with, and the flora of Southeast Asia, is what really set the hook. Like, wait a minute, there's a bigger story going on here. Like, we have a sassafras, they have a sassafras. You know, we have lindera, they have lindera. And so trying to figure all that out, right? Stories you've all heard, right? We all know southeastern United States, similar flora to Southeast China. And here's just examples of two of those similarities. And so, this is why we go to China. This is why we still go. You can't compete with this. China, same essential land area as the United States, and they have nearly 30,000 species. They will say up to 35,000, and we say we have less than 20,000 species. And so EAS, Eastern Asia, and then North America, the comparisons. Why is China so rich? I remember Todd Lassane and I are contemporaries, and Todd's contemporary with a lot of people. He was in school a long time. I love Todd. He would always say, we got robbed. North America got robbed. We don't have epimediums. Gosh darn it, we have all the other berberis, but we don't have epimedium. Why do we not have epimedium? Why do we not have this? Why do we not have that? And it is sort of interesting in a biogeographical context of why we are species poor in North America, Eastern North America. I won't get into this, we've got a lot of ground to cover, but basically, we have tertiary gardens. We gardened from the effects of 65 million years ago. That's what we're doing. We're gardening remnants of a vast archo-tertiary flora that covered the northern hemisphere 65 million years ago, and then through continental drift and ice and bridges and glacial periods, that flora was broken up and dispersed. And the remnants are in these vast, rich areas. And the reason that is because plant adaptations to climate are pretty conservative. There's a reason we grow maples. It's because maples tend to like where we live. It's not that you're going to find a maple necessarily in the desert. No, maples like, well, moist, drained soil, temperate environment, right? So we'll get through this real quick, but this is a very important thing, which I always wanted to go say, see, this is why, Todd. We didn't have the answer when Todd and I were in school, but we have this answer, and we have an answer now. And the figure basically is showing that what you all know, the topography of Eastern Asia is fragmented with sharp contrast in elevations. It's mountainous, okay? And it's not that they're just mountains, it's they're young mountains. And the elevation is high, the elevation goes up and down significantly over a short horizontal distance, right? And though you get isolation of these mountains and temperate flora in and amongst subtropical and tropical areas. So you have floras that are interacting, right? And then the lower in latitude you get, so the closer you get to the equator, the higher diversity. Well, we know that, right, in the tropics. Well, this is the kicker. That latitude in North America, anything below 30 degrees is where the great vast richness in China is. Okay, southwest China. Below 30 degrees, where are we? We are in the Gulf of Mexico. So as our plants moved around in the glacial period, they had no place to go other than into the Caribbean or in the highlands of Mexico. So where should we be going? Tony's been there. Highlands of Mexico, right? So eastern North America is relatively topographically homogeneous. You have the coastal plain, the Piedmont, and the mountains. You go to China, that's not the case. So, and we know this through a lot of molecular work and other things. So what happens is China becomes this storehouse of early evolutionary species that branched off, diverged early in their path. So like the great story of dawn redwood, right? We mostly know about dawn redwood. We knew it as a living fossil. We knew it as a fossil before it was discovered around World War II in China. And so it's an ancient lineage of conifers, of gymnosperms. We also know that within China, the rate of speciation is accelerated. And you know who found that out? Does that name ring a bell? I know it does over here. Jenny Zhang, here at NC State. I don't know if you realize what a treasure Jenny really is in the world of biosystematics and biogeography and taxonomy. She's a cornice expert. She's spoken, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Yes, okay. She's brilliant, absolutely brilliant. And so things like the silver fir, Cathea, which is an ancient lineage. And of course, species like maples. You know, we have what, half a dozen species of maples in North America? China has almost 100, or around 100. So why is that? That's why we keep going. Rhododendrons, again, 900 species. So anyways, China is not just a museum of diversity. They're not just preserved these ancient lineages. They're actually a cradle of diversity. They're actually, you can chart it in the molecular sequences that they are rapidly evolving in China. The conditions and topography are generating these species. They're under pressure to form these species. So that is why we go, in a scientific nutshell. The National Arboretum is part of something called NACPEC, the North American Chinese Plant Exploration Consortium. I like to think of them as the Zone 5 Mafia because they traditionally have been focused on Zone 5 gardens. And so that's why people like Tony took it into his own hands in the 90s and said, we're going to lead, what do you call, Apex? No, right. So, you know, there's this whole part of China and this whole great Zone 7 in South that had wonderful plants. And so we still go. And Acer Griezmann, the paperbark maple, is a great example. When it was collected by NACPEC, it was the first time essentially since Wilson, 80 years earlier, that this plant came into the country. And so we talk about conserving species in horticulture and botanic gardens. And Acer Griezmann, we still don't know to this day what genetic diversity exists within Acer Griezmann. The populations are fragmented, they're small. So one of the reasons we went over there was I was looking at all the herbarium specimens for Acer Griezmann to provide location data to our NACPEC collaborators who are doing some molecular research, and then they're going to go target that for new collections with the Morton Arboretum. And so I call it a conservation species because this is a new concept that's come up. As we move off into the future here in the 21st century, we as humans are going to be deciding which species are going to stay around. We have domesticated nature, and there are some species that may not exist unless we care about them. And you all know that with the characteristic megafauna, but we have that in plants. Catalpa bungii, this is the Indian bean tree from China that I was fascinated with, could not get a hold of during my PhD. Here it was at the National Arboretum, buried in the floodplain. And it was the first time it was collected in essentially 80 years. And we had one tree. And as you're running a tree breeding program, you want diversity, you want to look at this. And so we were going back to try to understand what's going on with Catalpa bungii in China and what does it have to offer for breeding. And I wrote this article with John Grimshaw, who has spoken here, and is probably most famous to you guys, I guess, for the Big Trees book that came out. And we talked about this in a review of Asian Catalpa, this Catalpa bungii dicloea fargesii complex. And I won't read this all, but the gist is explorers in eastern China used one name, explorers in western China used another name, and no one in 100 years has sat down and figured out if they were talking about the same thing. There's still work to be done. This is part of the frustration. We do not know it all in China. Even things that we think of as being well known are not well known. So that was part of why we went to China, was let's start to figure out what is going on in Catalpa in China. 11 species of Catalpa. This is from the plant list. They're trying to sort of know how many plants there are in the world. This is a pretty good shot at it. 11 species. This one down on the bottom, Catalpa tibetica, is the other problem. You probably have heard me talk about this before. As a Ph.D. student, I read about this and thought, here's a shrubby, creamy yellow flowered Catalpa from 4,000 meters in the Himalayas. Wouldn't that be great to breed with? Cold hardiness, great flowers, shrubby. So let's find it. Well, guess what? It wasn't in cultivation. No one knew anything about it. It was just a name. So here it is. Here's the original description by George Force, one of the great plant explorers of his time. And he says, creamy yellow shrub-like, collected in the Salween. And here's the latitude, 4,300 meters above sea level. Well, let's go get it. We saw the original herbarium specimen. Well, when I took a look at it, I said, it's not a new species. That fits in with Catalpa bignonioides. How does bignonioides in 1919 get in southwest China? Well, we went and took a look, and apparently Forrest back then was kind of lazy. He paid people to climb the mountains for him, and they got paid more for every new species. He never actually saw Catalpa in the wild. He has no idea where it came from. Our recollection, as best as we can tell, is that his group that he paid traveled through Dali, remember the name, Lijiang, and then Jinshaojiang, so up to the Yangtze River and then over to Tibet. And we could get close to Lijiang, a 1948 herbarium specimen of Catalpa bignonioides. So basically what we did in this paper is that Catalpa tibetica does not exist. It was an invasive North American tree species. That's hard to believe, isn't it? You think everything was coming from China to us. Well, you have to realize that China's been around for 4,000 years, and they had this thing called a Silk Road. So exchange was going both ways. They were interested in our plants. So another reason I was there was Boxwood. I got looped into Boxwood. I never thought I would say this, but I am the Boxwood curator of the National Arboretum. And thanks to a retirement, my good friend Lynn Batdorf, who was the long-term curator. And here he is with Bux's Harlandii, which is a beautiful boxwood for zone 7B and south. And it's one of the boxes that actually loves heat. And guess what? We have no idea what the hell this thing is in cultivation. And so I have a hunch, and that's why we went to China to look at that. This is the only shot you will see of Coralopsis. I went to look at Coralopsis. Anyone know the winter hazels? Right? Beautiful flowering Amyloidaceae. Should be getting ready to flower anytime soon. I took one look in the herbaria in China and folded the folders back and put them and walked away because it is so confusing. The Chinese have no idea what they're talking about. It is very confusing. There's either 30 species or 8 species, and I am not going to waste 2 lifetimes trying to figure it out. So, but we did go to take a look because there's a lot of great diversity. And this is what we did. This is not sexy. This is not what you came to hear. I'm going to show you 2 hours of dried plant specimens. So this is what we did. We went to the herbaria, and that is actually me after 23 days in China, looking at dried plants. I was done. I aged. But that is my colleague Joe Kirkbride. And at 70 years old, he would beat me up a 3,000 meter mountain anytime. He was incredible at traveling painting. So what we did was we just went through the entire Catalpa collection, pulled it out, and we had to go through and figure out and basically recreate what Chinese Catalpa exists. We went to Kunming. So that was in Beijing, one of the great institutes, one of the great herbaria. We went to Kunming, Yunnan, right, capital of Yunnan province. This is their Southwest China Plant Genetic Resource Center. This is a big deal. That's about 7 stories, 4 of it is underground at least, and that is the seed bank for wild Chinese plants in China. And we needed to go crack that nut, excuse the pun, to figure out how to work with them, because China's been very difficult. So we went, naively so, to try to figure that out. We also went to Nanjing. So we went from Beijing all the way over to the foothills of the Himalayas, sort of, and then back to the coast. Nanjing is just outside of Shanghai, essentially. And great, this is the original capital of China, and this is the original botanical institutes in China before Beijing sort of took over. So this is Nanjing. So we went to study there and meet colleagues along the way. And it almost didn't happen. That is a real sign in Southwest Virginia where my in-laws live. And all of our paperwork was in during the shutdown. We had no idea. Visas, passports, travel flights. I could not speak with my Chinese colleagues, could not speak with anyone. It was a $5,000 fine if I sent an email during the shutdown, because by law, I was doing work. So we pulled it off, unbelievably. We pulled it off. And this is not the North Pole. This is actually Washington, D.C. Actually, we took the North Pole route. So to Beijing. And I'm going to keep going faster because I got a lot of slides to go through. And I just want to show you Beijing has changed. And we did something that most people never do in China. Tony, how long have you spent in Beijing? Mark, how long have you spent in Beijing? I am crazy to go to Beijing as a plant person. This is the Omaha, Nebraska of the United States in terms of plants. I mean, you're at 40 degrees north latitude. We'll get to that in a little bit. Heaven knows why they built a capital. There's no river, there's no port. I mean, it's like a strange spot to have a capital. But this is the new university being built. And we were there right after the particulate matter hit 1,200, the reading for the fine, 25. It's supposed to be anything over 25 and you're in trouble. Well, we were there, it had just peaked at 1,200. That is not overcast, that is literally sunset on the smoggy day. And China has changed. So we went to, this is the Fragrant Hills in Beijing, so we went to the Botanic Garden. This is the Institute of Botany, the South Garden. This is the academic garden in Beijing. There is the North Garden of the Beijing Botanic Garden, which I will show you, which is the public side, display side. It's basically sweeps of 100 when they plant things. It's not nearly as interesting as the Institute of Botany. And again, this is what we did. We camped out at level 4 in the herbarium, and we looked at specimens. And we think, after having gone through China, that we were the first Westerners to look at the Catalpa in probably 30 years. I actually take that back. No Westerners had looked. We were probably the first scientists to look at them in 30 years. So it looked like the only time that some of them were viewed were when they wrote that chapter of the Flora of China, and they did a really crappy job on that. So we were the first ones to come in and systematically just overhaul what it meant. And this may not mean anything to you guys, but while we were in China, we annotated 600 specimens. That means we corrected 600 specimens that the Chinese had looked at 30 years ago to write the Flora of China. What does that tell you, Tony? Anyone? They had no idea what they were looking at. And part of it is not their fault. All of those species had been collected by Westerners, and the herbarium specimens were sent to Paris. They were sent to London. They were sent to Boston. And the Chinese didn't have access for 100 years. And so it's really paramount that Westerners go back and start to say, hey, look, let's start to look at this. And that's just Catalpa, something that only has 11 species. Heaven forbid. You have an Incarvilia up here, I can guarantee you have no idea what species this is based on the flora of China. It's a mess. Incarvilia is a disaster. But you probably know what that one is. But again, this is supposed to be a simple genus. And this is what we look at. This is Catalpa fargesii. And in a nutshell, what we did is there is Catalpa bungii, fargesii, and dichlorei. When we write our paper up this summer, we're basically going to say it's all bungii. Because no botanist ever sat down and looked at the continuum from a glabrous Catalpa bungii. That's the only character that separated the two. Glabrous leaf versus stellate pubescence. This is literally splitting hairs. Fargesii was fully pubescent. No one bothered to line them all up and look, and there is a continuum of perfectly glabrous to perfectly pubescent and everything in between on all parts of the plant. And so you have one wide-ranging species, and we'll come back to that. So we looked at Buxus arlindii. This is why you go to Herbaria. You can't really maybe read it right there, but it says typica. That's Latin for type. Really what that means is this is not the type, because I know the type. This is the type location. So when Buxus harlindii was originally discovered, it was found on a stream in Hong Kong, and this is the site. So they went back to that site. So if you're going to understand what Buxus harlindii is, the Harlan's boxwood, you need to go back to the original specimens. That's why we have herbaria. So we did that. And this was in complete contrast, actually, to Catalpa, because this complex of species, about 5, we were in luck. The Chinese boxwood expert was in the building. He had switched to a new project, he got transferred, but he had basically done our work. He had annotated these specimens, I could track his papers, I knew what he was talking about, I could see the specimens, I could match it up, and I agree that he took 5 species of boxwood in China and reduced them to 1. And harlindii is the name with priority. So we're going to be following up on that. But that was great. That was a rare thing to find out that a Chinese botanist had gotten to something that you were interested in. So that worked out very well. But what was interesting is this species. Have anyone ever heard of Buxus rugulosa? Who's here in the American Boxwood Society? Dr. Durr says if you have nothing else to do, join that society. It's literally in his book. But this is a very fascinating species to me because it occurs at higher elevations in southwest China. It actually gets out of southwest China. It's prostrate to a medium-sized shrub, great leaves, and I looked at a lot of herbarium specimens. And as far as I know, this species is only listed once or twice maybe in some cultivated list, but I'm not sure they have the real thing. But again, there are still, just because 5 got lumped into one species by one author doesn't mean there's a good species that we've missed. So I could see literally getting the Boxwood Society and some others to get a trip to China. And then this is the Acer Griezmann work we did where we were tracking down the type location. So that's it. That's the dried specimens. Now the fun part, right? This is what you really want to see is the travel log, the food. We had a boring life. We were in Beijing for a week, and we would go to the herbarium, and then we would eat here. This is the cafeteria. And we would have the noodles. I'd call my son, we're having noodles today. What are you having? Oh, we're having noodles. But we had a great host there, Dr. Yong Yang, which you'll see in a little bit. This is the North Garden, which is really a showcase garden. There's Yong. Tony, sorry, I keep pointing out on Tony, but Tony, it's just because you've grown so many plants, I can use you as an example. He is a world expert on ephedra. So if you ever have an ephedra question, his email is actually ephedra@sina.com. But he's an early gymnosperm expert, and he was one of the few Chinese we met that actually was an incredible field botanist. He knew a lot of plants. This gentleman right here is Kong Wong. He's a long-term collaborator with NACPEC. He's based out of Beijing in the North Garden. And every time we go to China, we work with Kong because he was trained. I don't want to say he was trained. He did internships here in the United States. He gets what we're about. A lot of the Chinese, this is part of the frustration. They have no idea what parts of American horticulture is really about. It's hard to explain. So, and then of course this is Beijing. So Pinus bungiana, lace bark pine, which is all over. There's a street tree there. This is where it's native. A wonderful plant. Beijing is at 40 degrees north latitude, which is the same latitude as Philadelphia, but completely different environment. It's all those cold, dry air off of Siberia. And this is Acer truncatum. So if you wonder why Acer truncatum is so tough, this is where it's from, in that part of China. Pinus tabuliformis, the Chinese mountain pine. This was during the Chrysanthemum Festival. But the North Garden is really a park. So Plantsman, you don't really have to go. You've seen it. You can go someplace else. A lot of the parks, a lot of the Institute of Botany are based on famous historical sites. So they're almost always centered on a temple. And here is the temple in the North Garden in Beijing. And that sort of forms the core of why there's a park there in the first place. That's everywhere we went, that was the case. So like 400-year-old Chinese arborvitae, just that little thing that you can buy for $4.99 at Kmart. Wonderful plant. Best looking amore honeysuckle I've ever seen. Which amore honeysuckle is a horrendous weed, but you know the prayer flags and Aesculus chinensis. So the Chinese chestnuts. As a street tree breeder, I was thinking of chestnuts, maybe horse chestnuts that will work on these. And here's a great one in fall color. And so that was our first week. And then we had the weekend, which was great. So we got to do some horticultural things. So we went to the Great Wall, and the Great Wall there's a lot of the Great Wall. but this is the most famous section, or the most easily accessible from Beijing. And what I didn't realize, which I should have, why, that it's all been reconstructed. It's not that well preserved. They've been reconstructed. But again, you get the sense of the enormity. And we are north of Hubei. Hebei is basically the province that Beijing was carved out of. And so you're looking south back towards Beijing, and the idea, of course, the Great Wall was to keep people out. It was great to see old friends. And growing up at J.C. Ralston Arboretum, things like this, Syringa oblata. So the early lilac, the plant that J.C. had identified, really the variety dilatata, that was a low-chill lilac that you could actually grow in the south, right? And then Platycladus, the Pinus, and then Ulmus pumila. Yeah, okay, it's a weed, right? Chinese elm is a weed. But to see these plants in the native habitat, that's why we go, right? The new appreciation. And Ziziphus, just regular old jujube, Chinese date, growing wild, the wild forms. So again, Platycladus, Ulmus. Celtis, I've worked on Celtis a little bit in the National Arboretum. I have a new appreciation for them. This was a species I was really excited about. This is Dr. Bunchesback Berry, and we had some great trees at the National Arboretum, but they've been infected with some sort of virus. We don't know what it is, but our pathologists are working on it. And again, I first knew about this Catinus cajagria growing here because of Roy Lancaster. Never thought about it, but in his travels in China, he talks about seeing smoke bush, regular old smoke bush in fall color along the Great Wall. And so, gosh, all right, Roy Lancaster saw it. I've been here. So, my to-do list, my bucket list is partly done. And again, smoke bush, great old smoke bush. So, China has changed, right? Industrialization is not the China that everyone went to in the 90s to collect plants. They have good beer now. Okay, good. All right. I was gonna say. Okay. All right. So, so we went to the summer palace, and this is literally the air. This is not overcast. It's not about to rain. This is a full sun day in Beijing. That is the air. Now, the only thing I did to cheat in this picture was I took the saturation level on the photograph and said there's got to be some color in here, so I cranked it up when I did the. But otherwise, that is the air. That's a man-made lake. This is the summer palace for the imperial palace. China. We had the option to go down and see the what do you call that? Forbidden City, and we ran into an American in a grocery store. And she says, "Oh, if you like plants, there's no reason to go. Just go to the summer palace." I was like, "Sweet!" So we went to the summer palace and saw lots of great plants. So Salix babylonica, Geneticist chinensis, just regular old common plants. But when you see them growing the way they're supposed to, you sort of get new appreciation. And I think about JC a lot with this because JC just wouldn't show rare, strange, unusual. He would show impressive, right? He would show that these plants may be common, but used correctly, they're wonderful plants. Again, the Syringa oblata. I forgot. Does it do this here? I can't remember. Does Syringa oblata get that good fall color mark?
No, sometimes.
Do we have any left?
Yeah.
Did you make room for
We have the original.
Okay.
Green Meyer, but
Yes. And this, I couldn't help but think of JC here with this. He probably was here. He probably walked this alley in the summer palace of the Syringa oblata. And if you're in that cold, harsh environment, wow, how exciting would it be when that thing finally blooms after you've gone through that winter? Again, I work with trees, so I took a lot of pictures. Ulmus davidiana, one of the groups of elms like Ulmus wilsoniana, we've introduced an introduction to the National Arboretum. A great urban tree, you'll see it up in Morton. Morton's released a couple. Corcus mongolica. Just again, seeing China's changed. I wanted to go see the bikes, right? All the bikes. That's not bikes anymore. China is. This is the international airport in Kunming. Mark? Have you been to Yunnan?
no.
No. Okay. So Chengdu is probably the same thing. I mean, what's interesting about Kunming, which I learned about any World War II busing here, was where one of the Flying Tigers squadrons were based to do the airlift across the Himalayas, right? To supply what was left of the Chinese government that escaped the East Coast where the Japanese were. And Kunming really developed during World War II because of the Chinese government. So that's, will come up. Kunming Botanical Garden, established 1938. Now Kunming is on essentially the horse, what they call it, the horse silk road or the horse tea road in China. So the southern route of the Silk Road where trade has been going on for thousands of years. So again, it goes back to why Catalpa bigonioides are native when they do there. But so we went to the Kunming Institute of Botany. It's pretty amazing to sit there and see Loropetalum and Osmanthus fragrans. It's like you hadn't gone anywhere. It's like you just went from here to Atlanta. Trachycarpus and eucalyptus. You wouldn't know really you're in Kunming at this point. And we went to meet this gentleman who is the director of the Kunming Botanical Garden, Dr. Sun Wei Bang, who is a national treasure. And again, he was one of the few Chinese we met, even though he was the director, that was an avid plants person. He knew all sorts of things about plants. He comes from a conservation background, so here we are trying to figure out where we're going to go in Yunnan to find Catalpa and Boxwood. We got him out into the garden and told him that, you know, we're going to rewrite what you know about Catalpa. We hope you don't mind, which is a big deal because in writing the Flora of China, this monumental work, you had Western botanists versus Chinese botanists, and you really had to. There was a lot of infighting, basically saying the Chinese wasn't going to change. You Westerners don't know what you're talking about. And you had to respect that. So there are a lot of treatments in the Flora of China where the Chinese author was unrelenting in terms of his stance, and so the staff at the Missouri Botanic Garden just had to back off. And David Beaufort wrote a lot of those as the English author, the gentleman you saw speak. And I'm sure he can tell you more about the frustration. And they're really into conservation, so they're famous for their magnolias, the magnolia garden. This used to be called Magnoliaceum sinicum, it's a different genus, but really it's a magnolia. I think, if I remember right, there's only 4 trees left in the world, in the wild. And so they have a massive conservation program. And this seed was all generated by a 4-story platform they used to do hand pollinations to regenerate seed. And 6 months before we got there, one of their scientists fell off and died. We have a little bit different OSHA standards than they do, but that's, again, they do a lot of work. They also do ornamentals, so they're working on the Michelias. And this is pretty poignant here with Michelia unionensis, and we've got an introduction. I left the old name, I didn't want to get into the taxonomy here, but again, I've reviewed papers coming out of Kunming in terms of magnolia breeding. They're doing a lot, and pretty amazing. He took us into the yellow camellia house. So you may have heard David Parks talk about yellow camellias, or Cliff Parks. Well, this greenhouse has padlocked doors, and the director could not get in. He had to make the phone calls to arrange for all of us to go in at the same time, and so he gave us a tour of this house. The yellow camellias are a national treasure in China. A lot of them are very rare, and people have been trying to use those to breed cold hardy yellow camellias. I don't know how well it's going. Camellia impressa nervus, one of the more common ones, I believe. I found it interesting. I just threw this in there because I actually collected seed off of this plant. This is just regular old Chemonanthus praecox, but it's a very good deep yellow flowering form that I saw in Kunming. So I collected it. So I thought that it was interesting. At the same, I wondered from an ecological niche, why did they both evolve these deep yellow flowers here in late winter? What's pollinating them? I thought that was fascinating. So it's not a camellia, it's a Chemonanthus, but we've got a seed of this. I'm hoping it comes true. So again, a lot of conservation. This is a species of hibiscus that I'm pretty sure is not in cultivation unless Tony has germinated the seeds I gave him. Did you germinate it or not? Oh, just one? Okay, the price has now gone up. Hibiscus eriticola. So this is a rare endemic to southwest China, and I think probably really high and dry, good drainage, but hot sun won't be a problem. It was a beautiful species, really pubescent, and they do a lot on conservation. Whether it has real ornamental value, I don't know. It is pretty. It is a pretty cool plant. They work a lot on budlias, butterfly bushes. Anyone know butterfly bush? Okay. Well, Southwest China has a problem with butterfly bushes, and there's a lot of them. They're working on the genetics and taxonomy. I've given that data to Denny Warner, so I'm trying to hook them up, and they're doing a lot to try to start to figure out what's going on with budlia. I think budlias are kind of like orchids in Southwest China. They're a rapidly evolving species, and to try to figure out how many species you have is probably just a nightmare. This is just regular old Budlia davidii. They're common butterfly bush, but there's a lot of species, and I looked at them in the herbaria too, and I don't even know how you start to get your grasp with diversity. They're working specifically on this Budlia crispa because it will form hybrids. They think they found hybrids with other things in the wild, trying to figure out the origination of that. This is one that I really like and is really a nightmare. I have it as Budlia macrostachy because I think of it as Budlia cylindrostachy. because of the upright inflorescence that's in this cylinder. And when I see macrostachy in China, I've seen it in herbarium sheets, maybe they're just collecting the ones that are pendant, but the raceme is sort of pendulous. But this was a very upright one, very fragrant. And again, the taxonomy is a nightmare. I'm not a bud lead expert, but there's something going on there. And of course, it's in their garden. They're trying to figure it out. So it's nice to see friends in the wild. Metapanax delavii. Unfortunately, ours at the National Arboretum, this is basically, think of it as a cut leaf fatsia. Everybody know the Aureliaceae. Aureliaceae is really hot, right? Everyone likes the plant geeks are going nuts over Aureliaceae. And ours got zapped this year. We hit about 5 degrees, but it was dead by 7. I know that at the National Arboretum. I don't know if there's been damage here yet. I don't know what the low temperature was. Ours had massive bark splits. I'm not sure what happened, but it got blasted. Found this cool thing. We didn't do a lot of collecting, and that was part of the frustration was we didn't have authority as a USDA to really collect in the wild. But Dr. Sun-Wei Bong gave us permission to collect in the garden. And I interpret that as not in conflict with the USDA's collecting protocols. And so we collected. And this was one I was really excited about. I gave it to Tony, and I have a few seeds left. And I'm a firm believer in what JC used to do is you don't give it away to everybody. You give it to the people that has the best chance of doing something with it. So I tried to divide a few of these things up to give the right people. And Tony's got this. He couldn't believe it was an Ophiopogon, right? Couldn't believe it. That's my backpack for scale.
Yeah.
And David Creech, I haven't gotten to this, but David Creech, you know David Creech, was with me. We ran into each other. I know it's hard to believe, and it was blue fruit. I swear on my grave we collected, it was blue fruit. So it should be an Ophiopogon, and I know Tom Rainey's trying to get a hold of it, so I'm using it as a carrot for something else, I guess. So this is why we went. You want to get out into the middle of China, what's left of old China. Let's go out into the mountains. This is the Kangshan, right? This is the famous mountain range above Dali along the Silk Road, where every plant explorer since the 1840s has sort of tromped through. Incredibly botanically rich. And first you had to get there. So this was about a 2-hour delay. There was a damage in the tunnel. This is in the middle of Yunnan. This is a sunny day. It's not cloudy. It's not just Beijing. It's not just the cities. The whole country has bad air. So what do you do when you're in a traffic jam and you're in Yunnan? You hop out. And, so again, budlias everywhere, just like we see here when it's invasive. No, just kidding. So butterfly bush, I think it was foresight, but who knows really. And found my old friends in Negaphora, clematis, and a few other things. And we walked around, and so again, this is corn, integrated into Chinese culture. Corn is not from China. Corn came from the New World. So the plant exchange was both ways. We have to remember that. Again, both ways. This is Chinese pistache. This is a great heat-tolerant urban tree, a little weedy if you have a female. But these hillsides mostly eucalyptus now because they needed it for agroforestry. In fact, Australia had this, apparently they were talking about some deal that Australia had that China would plant so many hectares of eucalyptus for so long. And my God, the Chinese are regretting that. No one talked real favorable of it, other than the poor peasant farmer that just knew that he could get a lot of firewood quickly out of. But it's really been an ecological disaster in the hills of China, southwest China. The eucalyptus. Well, I mean, when it's hot, I'm sure when it's hot, but I wouldn't say that it was overwhelmingly eucalyptus. I never had a cold while I was there, so maybe. But you go all this way, literally around the world. And what do you see when you get out in Dali, the center, this great area of diversity? Magnolia grandiflora as a street tree. And it is a very popular street tree in China. We saw it in a lot of places, growing in essentially the native area of Magnolia delavii, which, as a plants person, you've always wanted to see in the wild. This great evergreen magnolia from southwest China. And it's like, really? I come all this way. And we saw a lot of stuff like that. Ligustrum, red tip Photinia, loripellum. And So here we are. This is Dolly. This is the golden pagodas, the 3 pagodas. And when you hear, read those Heronswood Callongs, read some of the, I think, Tony, you were in the Kongshan, weren't you? Okay. And then north of Kongshan is going towards Lijiang, Bimeishan, and a few others. I mean, this, I may be wrong in the names, but basically going up into this area is where a lot of plant exploration has gone on in the last 20 years. It's a very rich area. We wanted to get there. Our host got sick and had to leave. So our 2-week trip in Yunnan, which was going to go out to these more remote areas, got cut short, and we had to turn back and go around. So we did not get to go into the remote areas. So we went to Kongshan. Kongshan has changed probably since Tony was there. All we did was take the ski lift up. They've got a paved road halfway up the mountain. You just sort of walk around, easy hike, and then walk down. And it's a World Heritage Site now, protected. You cannot collect. The Chinese cannot collect. So it's like Yellowstone. You go and you take pictures. And it's great to see Pinus armandii and Pinus chinensis, which we've grown in our gardens. And you go, and these are high elevation, up, well over 4,000 meters. The trick, of course, would be, and I'm not an expert, would be, where do you want to be on that mountain? What is the right elevation to find what I'm interested in? You don't want to be at the top, the alpine rhododendron fastigiatum or Juniper squamata necessarily, but you don't want to be down all the way in the low elevation tropic areas. And so you have these gorges where the cold air sort of comes from the high elevations, and you have these really rich, steep areas where the intrepid explorers would collect. We just followed the trail and see things like this. Anyone read Dan Hinckley's Plant Explorer's Garden? You should. I did recently, which is why I sound smart, is Viburnum cylindricum is a very widespread. I always thought it was a rare plant cultivation. It may be somewhat rare cultivation, but that's because it's so common in Southeast Asia. Apparently, Dan sees it everywhere when he's at low elevations. So I sort of thought, well, I'm at the wrong elevation if you see this evergreen species of Viburnum. And you see Scheffleras. Tony, I wish I knew what it was. Do we have any other Raleiaceae people? I sort of show this. Tell me what it is, Tony. Anyone? Who knows? I know. Does it get there? I don't know. What a mess. Again, Metapanax, the labii in the wild. All this stuff we're passing out. Some of it in seed. Shima argenii. So Shima is the closest relative to Franklinia. This is what Tom Rainey has used to breed those new intergeneric hybrids. And so we got to see it in flower. We actually checked fruit on this one, and the fruit was not viable. There was very little seed. And then stuff that I'm not sure people have grown in the U.S. It'd be interesting to test. This is Euonymus cornutus, so the bull's horn Euonymus, because it has these tremendous protuberances off the capsule. Now, normally I do not put a name on Indigofera. So Indigofera has over 600 species of species, and a lot of them are in China. But I grew Indigofera pendula before. I gardened with it at Heronswood, and I would say we're getting close. That may be pendula, but I'm not sure. But it was really, again, nice. Normally these have really long racemes of pink flowers. They're just really a tremendous, and I don't know how well it's done in general cultivation. Because of course Dan can get away with anything out there in the Pacific Northwest. Hemlocks. So this is Suga mimosa, or Unanensis, and we work on hemlocks. We're breeding hemlock woolly adulty-resistant hemlocks. And so we've got a lot of collections over the years of Suga chinensis. So it was really great to see that. And you sort of think back, wait a minute, have I seen this before? Obviously you haven't. This is Sichuan and the H. Wilson. But again, I can't help but think about the juxtaposition of a century with Aves de labia, beautiful fur. Now this is when you know you're gone too high. This is when you want to turn around. Coffee is not bad. An exposure suit, hot drinks, and oxygen is starting to tell you that maybe you're getting too high. But again, I'm not sure that was there when you were there 20 years ago, Tony. And this is the funny thing. We went there because we thought we would see boxwood at the right elevation. We knew we wouldn't see Catalpa, but we were hoping to see boxwood. We talked with Dr. Sun Weidong. We looked at the herbarium sheets. We really wanted to get to Lijiang, but we thought that we should see it. The only time we saw Buxus was once at the restroom on our way in, and once at a grave on our way out. And the The reason I tell you that is because my hunch has been, every time this plant was collected and brought into the cultivation in the United States, if you read the collector's notes, from Frank Meyer to Skip March to Roy Lancaster, you know what it says? Cultivated. It was grown in a pot. It was grown in the hotel. It was grown in a landscape. No one has collected it other than the type locality, this plant growing in the wild. And so I think what we have in cultivation is really just 1 or 2 clones, if that. And I think in cultivation in China is very limited. And again, China has been a civilization for 4,000 years, around there, give or take a few. So we were looking for Catalpa. We knew where we would try to find it in the hills. We were told it was on the roads going between Lijiang and Dali and Kunming. And we would get out and think, this is it. And we would tromp across the rice paddy, tromp around and go, and all it was eucalyptus. We would talk to the farmers and they would say yes, and we would go and it would be more eucalyptus. And they said, is this a wild tree? They said, yes, we dug it up from the wild and planted it on their farm. And thinking, okay, they have no clue that eucalyptus is not native. This was the first time we saw it. Catalpa bungii in the wild in China was in a gravel yard on the old road to Lijiang underneath power lines, and it should have just been cut down. And that was my friend, and I think he about had enough. And Joe's like, I came all the way to China to see this. This is not what I was thinking. Prior to that, the Chinese botanist said, oh, you need to go to the former Yunnan Forestry School on your way. There was a great grove of Catalpa bungii, this famous Catalpa I'm looking for. Well, we spent half a day looking for it. We got there, we found it, and it was Catalpa ovata, the common Chinese Catalpa with yellow flowers, not pink flowers. This isn't difficult. Yellow versus pink. And the problem was those 600 herbarium specimens. They had no clue what they were talking about. And so I went over, take a bathroom break. I have a small bladder, I will admit, and went over to this planter, figured it needed some water. And I looked down, and there is Buxus harlindii. Again, in an abandoned container at a former forestry school, I keep running into Buxus harlindii. So this is the new road in Dali, a lot of change. And they thought, I was beginning to cry wolf, I guess. I said, no, this is Catalpa, I know it is, I swear I saw it, stop the car. We stopped the car to go back in here. I said, no, I'm serious, we saw it. We got back, we went to the back roads, and it was. This is Catalpa bungii growing in a yard. Not very impressive, by the way. There it is again. Notice a lot of these straight shoots, vigorous shoots. Come back to that. Here it is, suckers in the abandoned barn. And we finally ran into someone who knew what they were talking about. And I will admit, not one of us wrote down this gentleman's name, and I'm appalled that I did not catch his farmer's name. But we came out, someone found out that we were interested in his trees. He came out, and then you always get a little bit worried. And once he found out where we were from, and here are these people from the United States interested in his trees, they do what most plant people do. They opened up. We had wonderful conversations. All of these people from this little town outside of Dali, or this little village, came. The kids were wondering what. Here we are. He is, I think his level of stature in the village has just gone up. And we spent about an hour there talking with him. And we took his photo, and this is a coppice road. And I'm coming to why this is important. Because what we found out was that Catalpa bungii, we knew it had a long history of cultivation, but it turns out that they have a clone of this species that they propagate via root cuttings. And they cut back the main trees, they force the new growth up, you get these root suckers, and then they dig them out, and they plant them in their field. And they have about a 20 to 25 year cycle, and then they cut the trees down, and they sell them on the lake there in Dali for boats. It's a preferred wood for building their boats, and it's also a high-grade wood that is used for other furniture and other purposes, but it's very valuable for boats. So I saw these root cuttings, and I thought, well, this is not very impressive. And I said, do you have any bigger trees? And he sort of looked at us for a while, and he said, well, okay, And we went to the back of his property, the road I had seen. And this is his grove. And it is very protected because this represents his retirement fund. This is the 25-year-old trees that are getting very close to being coppiced, and then that wood is then sold. And so he did not want people to know that he had this tree. And we asked, and no one ever sees fruit on these things. This tree has not been collected in 80 years. A lot of what we think in China is cultivated clonal material of these root sprouts. And we saw this even on the Arnold Arboretum tree. There's one tree in the United States up there. And here he is with his friend who wanted to give him a shot. And this is the eucalyptus that's half its age. And this is what's getting replanted. So this globalization, remember plants have been going both ways. The frustration is this long heritage of association with this tree has been cultivated for 1,000 years, is being supplanted by a faster growing tree for the reason that he needs that firewood and other wood for years. So that's part of the frustration when you try to go back and see all these old things. They're just not there anymore. And so we went back to Kunming, somewhat dejected, but at least we had a good time looking at plants in the wild. And went to the Kunming Hort Expo, and which is about 1999-ish, is when everybody around the world gets together to celebrate horticulture. And all the countries bring and set up gardens, and then they stay behind in their parks for the future. And so this is the park. And we're going to have to speed up here, but there's just gardens galore. All the provinces of China are represented. This is Guangdong. You'll see this, which I've always been interested in, because you have Juniperus chinensis columnaris, which is upright, and you have the cultivar Spartan. But there's an old clone called Stricta. And I call this the Stricta group because you would see this around Kunming. That is not a cupressus, that is Juniperus chinensis. And I always thought, wouldn't that be cool to grow because Juniper chinensis is so tough for us. Yeah, I was going to say, when I came in and I saw your garden, Mark, I saw what the J.C. Olsen staff was doing outside. I thought, well, is that real trees? Did they already plant trees and do that? But that is the best use I've ever seen for crepe myrtle. Maybe. And there's another one. So where's my designers? Where are the landscape? I think could you do that in a nursery and sell it as like a tray, like an instant hedge in a townhouse garden now? I think you could. With flowers, I think that's cool. Again, long history of cultivation. And I did run into this gentleman. And it wasn't completely by chance, but it was that we were both going to be in China at the same time. It was just an alignment of the planets. So I got to hang out with Dr. Creech in Kunming, and then we went together to Nanjing, and they were there. He was there for a separate reason, actually funded by the USDA, with another colleague, Dr. Gary Knox, whom some of you may know, great magnolia expert and plantsman down in North Florida, University of Florida. And this is important because I don't know if you guys still have it here or not, or see it or in a greenhouse, but this is Aesclus wangia. This is an unusual horse chestnut from Vietnam, and this is actually from Yunnan province, which a lot of people didn't realize there was a population in Yunnan. And it has wonderful exfoliating bark. I don't know, is that plant still alive, Mark? Is it gone? Who got
I
it?
know original ones did.
I think it's dead, Mark. I don't think it made it this way.
But it's funny, everywhere you go, David's doing the same thing, stealing plants, and has that look on his face. Actually, no, we had permission. This is back in Kunming, and this is a really cool Gordonia. So we know we have a Gordonia, right, in the TACE here, Swamp Bay, or is that what it's called? And Gordonia lasianthus. And Gordonias, Polysporas, the TACE, the Camellia family, a little confusing, but this is a really nice one that was sort of columnar, really narrow foliage, great white flowers, and wouldn't do for here, but we collected seed, and then I brought it in under our permit, and then I subsequently distributed it to a few people. I don't know if you got that one. Probably a zone 9 plant. Kunming is like listed as like a subtropical montane eco-region or whatever. So it's kind of like San Francisco Bay, let's call it. This is Carex scaposa, which is an interesting sedge, which I had not heard about. I've never seen anything like it. And so I thought, well, I must have it. And so I collected it when we were there. Well, we collected it, and then we've already distributed those seeds. So it would be interesting to see how well that performs. But those leaves are really wide. I mean, that's pushing almost 2 inches at the widest point. So as a textural element in the shade garden, that would be really interesting. Or it could be a horrendous reed, and at that point I didn't collect it, David Creech did. And again, we collected this because if you're looking to Flora, China, and you talk to taxonomists, this is the same thing as Laribe muscari, just regular old Laribe you have in your garden. But except this one can have 1 meter long inflorescence, right? So it's the same one you have, right? And I know this has been offered, Tony's offered maybe a Korean farm or something, but so it was nice to get some additional germplasm for evaluation, and that's been distributed. And again, I would beware when you meet David Creech in China because he puts you to work. He's very famous. He has an entourage. And again, you eat strange things with him. This is the obligatory strange meal: duck stomach, bamboo worm, duck bacon, bamboo worm, duck intestines, and something else duck. And then donkey, which is really popular in China right now. And I think it was how it was prepared with, but it was horrible. And so I went to China. I wasn't going to give a single presentation. I ended up giving 3, thanks to David. And so now I had to work. My joyride was over. And so this is in Nanjing, preparing for talks to the crowd. Then they made me go speak to Technical Community College. This is their Landscape 101 course, basically. And so I was talking to a bunch of, and they just wanted to talk to an American. So it was a great experience. They just wanted to practice their English and ask questions. And sort of set you up to say strange things like, why are all Americans greedy and dominating the planet? And you're supposed to answer, because I don't read a red book.
Did you have translators?
I did, yeah. They rotated around. They had young students. The translators were always young students. And the whole point, again, we did go there because we wanted to meet our colleagues at Nanjing. There's a lot of tree breeding going on there. These are the Catalpa breeders from the Nanjing Forestry University. This is Dr. Yin, who does all the taxodium work that you probably have heard, the bald cypress work in China, and then all of his graduate students. And so forming collaborative relationships here. This is Taxodium mucronatum, the Mexican bald cypress. This is the female parent that Dr. Yin's program has been using to create all these bald cypress hybrids. His program, he works in the ecology department, more or less. His job is restoration. They have planted 10 million plants out of 12 of his hybrids in China, from the coast to the Three River Gorges Dam, basically just for restoration. And the Three Rivers Gorges Dam, these trees, I'll get to this in a second. So here's the original Nanjing Beauty, which is the hybrid that has been passed around the United States. This is a new selection that they're very excited about. I think David Creech has it. But this is an interesting, Ted, I took this for you. They built these concrete weirs to do all their testing. So this is basically unflooded, half flooded, and then fully submerged. And so they do all of their screening to test how much these plants, young seedlings, can tolerate. And the reason is the water levels in the Three River Gorges Dam area fluctuate by 30 meters in the season. 30 meters, so 90 plus feet. Because again, remember the topography in China, that part of China is very steep. So when you have a dam holding up water, it's not going horizontal as much as it's going up. So they are planting these trees with the expectation that they have to survive the winter completely submerged as adult trees. That's a really tough task. And I've asked about this plant, and I asked about it, and I asked about it. Every time I gave a talk, I showed a picture of the J.C. Ralston. This is Cornus wilsoniana, Wilson's dogwood, beautiful specimen right out here. And every time I gave a talk, I showed this picture and said, we are looking for this. We are looking for this. Just like tonight, just stairs, over their head. We went back out after lunch and poked around right at that research plot where Dave Creech has gone for 15 years. And I said, David, this is Cornus wilsoniana. He said, really? I thought that was a struggling Cornus cusa. And I said, either that speaks really low volumes over the expectations for Cornus wilsoniana, or it says something about a person who gardens in Nacogdoches, Texas. That is not Cornus cusa. And so I thought I will show this until I'm dead or he's dead, because we were looking for this one and everything we came about this, and he's been walking by for 15 years. I'll get back to that. So again, we wrapped up in Nanjing, and the sad thing about Nanjing is we were the first people in 10 years to this herbarium. It had been locked up, unstudied, unused, one of the great herbaria in China, because they basically didn't know what to do with it. It's actually stuck in plant records in their garden. They don't know what to do with their herbarium anymore. And so the woman, they finally had funds to open it up, and there was a young lady who was the curator, and she kept apologizing over the condition of this herbarium. Literally, we were the first people in 10 years outside of their garden staff because it had been locked up. And that was just a travesty. So we looked at Catalpa Green Program, we'll get through it again, temples. Lagerstromia, I will say this, what time is it? Anyone yelling at me? You guys okay? We'll get out before the ice storm. 8:49, all right, we'll wrap up. Lagerstromia, very important because anyone know what's going to happen to Lagerstromia in the next 20 years? Toast, because?
The scale.
And why would Jared know that? Because congratulate him, he just got, can I say this?
Yes, sure.
Okay, you all know that he's taking a job at Austin University. Great. Because there's a new scale they're trying to figure out. It's the first time a scale has attacked Lagerstromia in the United States. It's spreading since 2004. It's now from Texas and Arkansas, Oklahoma, or maybe Oklahoma, but Tennessee, that area. And it is really devastating. So we have this plant that has been indomitable in the landscape, and we have a new pest. And so we're trying to figure this out. Actually, Gary's team was, and they were bringing me up to speed, which I really appreciated. And we're looking here at Lagerstromia limii. This is the species of scale. They think it's either the azalea scale that jumped host, or it's actually this, which has not been identified. It's very unique genetic markers to test that. And so this is limii. You guys used to have, do you still have the plant in the mixed border, or is it mixed border divas? It was maybe labeled as Chikangulosa, which is not right. So limii. And the difference is here is indica in the background, smooth bark. Here's limii in a mature, sort of a shreddy, shaggy bark. And we never found the scale on this. It is in China. It's actually even in Beijing, a newly imported plant. And my brain starts thinking maybe we should be using this species in a new crepe myrtle breed. It doesn't help with the bark, but Florai is horribly susceptible. The red bark species, and that's what most of our hybrids. That's in the parentage of a lot of the new crepe myrtles. So it's something to be aware of. So the South Garden is on top of a Ming tomb. This is the original Ming wall that surrounded the city from 1300s. And this is where the garden is. Again, that's the air. Nanjing is great for us. It says zone 7. It's kind of a zone 8, really, especially when you see old cinnamons like this, which is a weedy camphor tree. And the Lauraceae is a great group. Also, the guy in Beijing, the ephedra guy, is also working on Lauraceae now, so he's going to be a great contact. And this was a beautiful tree, Phoebe chikangiensis, which is in the Lauraceae. It's in the avocado family, if you will. And I looked at it and I thought, this is a great tree. I bet you somebody has it. I bet you Creech has it. Maybe you guys have grown it. But you see these fleshy bird dispersed fruits? You know what cinnamomum does. And you think, I'm going to leave that one in China. You can hate me or not, but I don't think that was one we were not going to bring back. Finally saw boxwood in a garden, Chinese boxwood, horribly confused. Mahonias, big Mahonia people around. This is Urea bracteata, the species that led to soft caress, which was what, the RHS plant of the year or something? Or Chelsea flower. It didn't win an award. Ozzie Johnson's plant. Mahonia japonica, and good old Titchpanix. And the reason I show this is because I mentioned this to Tony when I was here a month or so ago, that I thought that there was a Urea bracteata by japonica hybrids in the garden. And I stand by that. I don't think that cross has been made. But the flowers are just coming on here in japonica. The flowers are just coming on here in Urea bracteata. And then you get around the garden these long leaf things where the teeth are restricted to the ends. There's another form with narrow leaves and wider leaflets. And I think that's probably what's going on. I think they're probably just hybrids in cultivation. I don't know if Tom Rainey's made that cross or if you've made that cross. It may just be that they don't flower at the same time here. And again, real Mahonia fortunii, not that powdery mildew thing. Well, actually, that is a real Mahonia fortunei, but I had to throw that in. And you see these things, you can't help think about JC, right? His love of Mahonias and the fact that we've got great people in North Carolina working on Mahonia. Plum Blossom Hill, those are all Prunus Mume. So we love Prunus Mume here at the Arboretum. Ming Tomb, which who cares about Ming Tomb other than there's more plants right now. I know. I love culture, but I love the plants. Giant Celtis at the Ming Tomb. The reason I'm just going through real quick is because we were walking through and it was great, wonderful, and I saw this back here and I thought, what is that? I don't recognize that. And I could see the bark and I thought, this is different. So I ran over there and found what I've been looking for. And this is Cornus wilsonii nurture trees. And there was a whole grove of them. That is the bark. I call that the true meat treasure. I know that Mark has seen some in China, but I thought, how has this plant escaped cultivation for so long? This is why we go to China. This is why. We still are trying to figure it out. Turns out this plant is used as biodiesel in China. It's a very old cultivated plant in China. It's got edible oil. They make an edible cooking oil out of the fruit. And it's actually kind of commonly cultivated in that part of China, apparently. And no one knew what the hell I was talking about every time I talked about Cornus wilsonii. And the only person that knew what I was talking about, once I showed him this plant, was the freshman who was who was walking around with us that day. And he said, I know exactly what you're talking about. We have lots of those trees and they're all in fruit. What? They're all in fruit. So we couldn't take it from the Ming Tomb, so we raced back to the Botanic Garden, and he took us straight to the grove, and we jumped the fence, and we collected a bunch of seed. We have about 400 seed up at the National Arboretum, and so we'll make a distribution of it. I know you guys have distributed plants here, but I think that's really good. And he's my hero. This little student, graduate students were useless. The professors were useless, but the guy that actually worked in the garden, the guy that actually pulled the weeds and spread the mulch was paying attention. So this gentleman needs an internship here this summer at the JC Olsen. I will give you his contact. And here's my translator, and here's Joe. So we had a great time there. Wrapping up, Qingshan Botanic Garden outside of Shanghai before we left. This garden was built in about a 2 to 3 year period. About 5 years ago, if I remember correctly, overnight. That's just the entrance lobby. That's one of the conservatories, largest conservatory complex in Asia. So I think it's probably the largest in the world. And when I say large, wow, that is large. Brand new garden. Mark, have you been here?
I was there in 2010 before it opened. They were opening in 2010 for the big expo there, and I asked if they were going to finish because it didn't look like they were, because that was half done.
Right.
And they said, yeah, they were going to hire another 5,000 people.
I asked them about their staff, and they said they have 250 people. I said, no, I said not just in research, but like in essentially administration. They said, well, probably another 200 people. I said, so does that include people that maintain the gardens? And they looked at me funny, and they said, that's not staff. And I was like, well, how, do they work here? Yeah, they work here. I said, so they're not staff? They said, no, they're workers. They're workers. 300. So they have 700 plus what I would call staff. Again, massive conservatories. Just outrageous. Again, this is part of China's. We had an economic stimulus plan in 2008. They've had one called the $1 trillion plan. So they're investing $1 trillion. 60% of the world's concrete is being poured in China right now. So massive building. This is the research labs. That's a different building than the administration. That is the research. We went to see Mr. Haibo. This is the research nursery. They traveled around the world, bought plants all over the world, and then they also traveled up and down eastern China collecting wild plants. That's the key. Travel up and down eastern China collecting plants. There's Mr. Haibo. He's actually a lotus breeder, Mulumbo. Yes, all of the graduate students are very stylish and walking in the muddy fields. The women are very stylish. And I was very happy to see this. This is Cornus quinquenervis. This is another unusual dogwood that is poorly known, again, because the Zone 5 Mafia didn't care about southern China for 100 years. So we have to go back and find out about it. We have one plant at the Arboretum. As far as I know, it's the only plant in cultivation. It's a horribly weeping, rounded thing that is really not good for modern gardens. And I went through their nurseries and picked out the best one. And it's upright. It has been pruned, but even in the upright growth, you have this. It has exfoliating bark, reminiscent of Cornus wilsonia, but not white, really gray-green. But it does exfoliate. And so we were able to take cuttings, and we made it through the quarantine. They're in quarantine right now, and they should be rooted. As far as I know, when I left, they were rooting. So I'm very excited about that. And then this, I'm really into exfoliating bark. I don't know what it is. Diospis oleifera. So this is a deciduous species of persimmon. And you can see the fruit there in the background, and really nice exfoliating bark. This is surely a Zone 8, 7B plant. I don't know. I mean, you probably haven't had damage on Cornus, but you can't tell yet. But the Cornus wilsoniana is fine. Looks good. Okay. I think these things have good. And again, small world. They went around the world collecting plants. All things are local. This is good old Falling Waters in their nursery getting ready to be planted out. So, we don't have a monopoly on running over to another culture and collecting plants. This is truly global. And we may not speak the same language, but I think we sort of get the point. I think this is a really good one. Don't step on the grass, but I sort of think it's more poetic about, green means life. And I'm a big fan of that. So thank you for bearing with all that rambling. And I think we have time to give away some plants, maybe. So thank you.
Richard, your love, you share with me Cornus wilsoniana and your work with John Grimshaw. You look at new trees, the book, the picture of Cornus wilsoniana, the gentleman around there is my host in China. We'll be here in a couple of weeks to visit with Government.
Awesome. That's
Small world.
explain why it's not.
Do you want to take any questions, Richard, or just go to the...
You. I mean, I know you guys want to get home before it rains. It's 9 o'clock. Let me phrase this, whatever it does.
I have a question.
Yes.
Did I hear you right that you're saying Buxus botnerii and Buxus harlandii are the same thing? I'm not a taxonomist. They look identical to me, so...
Again, we have the box blight. I was talking to Kathy earlier about box blight. You guys are aware of box blight, North Carolina, probably by now? Horrible disease. We have gotten significant funding from the industry and from Congress to address this. So I have 2 postdocs. One is taking a molecular approach to understanding the genetic diversity within cultivated boxwood. The other is working on fungal assays, much like Kelly Ivers, in terms of if we're going to have a breeding program to develop box blight resistant boxwood, we better know how to screen for resistance. We still have no idea what really is resistant. So we, in the process of doing all that, the taxonomy and the nomenclature side, we said, we've got to figure out what the hell Buxus harlandii is, because the early results from Kelly's lab made it sound like Buxus harlandii was the place to go for resistance. I don't think that's the case anymore. And again, it's not her fault. I'm not saying that. It's just that we're still uncovering a lot of data. And her data was the first great shot at it. And so we're following up with her on that. And so I was interested in Buxus harlandii. I thought, well, while we're at it, let's get as much successions as we can from everybody and figure out what's going on. And our curator was really adamant that it was separate based on the shape of the style and the length of the style. And I thought, that's not really that big of a deal, It's kind of like saying Rachel's a little taller than Lena. And I don't think they're different species. So we've gotten as much of it together, and we're looking at the data. We've got markers. We've developed molecular markers to be able to do the DNA fingerprinting, and hopefully I'll have an answer to you about it in the summer. But based on the Chinese work, they've already done it. They've already written a recent treatment that says they're all the same thing. So it's all harlandii. So we're really just going to follow that up and say, yeah, we probably agree based on the we may not. We don't know a lot about it. You have Buxus wallickiana here. That's not Buxus wallickiana. It's just some flowers. I'll bet. not my firstborn, this is on tape, isn't it? My secondborn, I will bet my second, no, sorry, Kelly. I don't think that's true. We've already written off to India to get Buxus true Wallichiana. We've got germinating seeds of true Buxus balearica from the Balearic Islands. So yeah, it's pretty exciting. But I think it's all the same thing. But it doesn't mean there's not variation, which you can see, that's worth delving into in terms of horticulture and crops.
What's wrong with the creepers?
It's the scale, this new scale that's popped up. And it's a sucking insect, and I don't even think it's classified as a soft scale or an armored scale. It's like one of those in-between things. I can't remember. Do you know the scale?
No, but I'm gonna.
You better look into it. You talk about.
I actually am gonna look into it.
Yeah, and it was on NNM Pro's website last week. Big thing going out. So think about all those crepe myrtles that need treatment. They don't know yet because scale insects are difficult to work with taxonomically, trying to figure out which scale is different. It looks like a azalea scale, which gets on azaleas. Well, scales are pretty stringent. You know, if you're an azalea scale, you would work on azalea. So it looks like it could be this crepe myrtle scale from Asia, but no one's figured out how to tell the two apart. So they're waiting for some molecular data to confirm the suspicion that this is a new invasive insect from China, from Asia. Yeah. You get massive, well, yes and no. You get massive amounts of sooty mold, right? Did you ever see any when you're down there, Jared? Massive amounts of sooty mold, and the trunks get covered in it, and then the plants go into decline. So long before it's dead, it's probably aesthetically very
Do they have chicks in China such as what we have here?
I never got any ticks. I'm sure they have them, but I never had a problem. I always hear about leeches. That's what I always hear about leeches. But no, I didn't.
How was your eyes and truly breathing? I mean, you showed how.
Oh, so yeah, at the end of the day, you're out of breath. So the question is, how did you feel, essentially? Yeah, at the end of the day, you're out of breath, your eyes are stinging, and you do have trouble getting a full breath. And it was compounded because we were working in a herbarium, which uses a lot of old chemicals, like not just mothballs, but a lot of worse things, camphor and other things. And so on top of the air pollution, we're working in an unventilated herbarium, and which is why taxonomists are so well preserved. They've been breathing that all that time. So these secrets. Again, I don't want to sound like I know anything about China because there was just one shot. These guys know a gazillion more. And hopefully, can I do this? I'm going to do this. I'm going to put pressure on J.C. Rawlson, on you, Ted and Mark. Hopefully, you guys are going to work with Bobby Ward and the board, I'm not even saying me, to bring in some plant explorers next year for the February symposium. So you have to do it now, like Nikanori Ogisu, which is one of the best Chinese floristic experts there are. So I'm putting pressure on them to actually pull this off, to bring in Roy Lancaster, Nikanori Ogisu, and John Grimshaw. You heard it first, right here. February, half-day symposium. You have to do it.
I don't know how you're going to fund getting all them in here with the Richard Olsen Chinese intern that are also.
Sky's the limit.
Very generous of you.
Sky's the limit. But Nikanori, I've never seen Dan Hinckley in awe before, I don't think. But when Nikanori spoke in Japan when I was there a couple of years ago, that was a lesson in the floristic diversity in China. That was amazing. So you got to get them.